But yeah, so after figuring that out, using all the information that we have, what we want to figure out is how their hand range is going to react to our different actions. And what I mean by that is like when we bet, what are they going to do with the different portions of their hand range? What are they going to do when we check, call, raise, go all in? The different things that we can do. And I would say that we can take somebody's hand range and break it up into three different parts of a hand range. And this is kind of a general thing, but it's kind of we're going to have the far left end of the spectrum of their hand range, which is going to be the air part of their hand range. It's going to be the ace highs. It's going to be like the pair of deuces on an ace king 10 board. Um, Basically hands that they're not putting any money into the pot with. That's going to be the air part of his hand range, and then that middle part of his hand range is going to be stuff like middle pocket pairs, like maybe a pair of tens on a jack high board would be kind of a middling part of a player's hand range. A gut shot would be that type of the middling part of his hand range. Also, something like the an ace, or excuse me, like a weak top pair versus a player who isn't willing to call a lot of bets without the nuts would be kind of the middling part of his hand range. Um, and that's all again, just factoring it based off of what we think the player's tendencies are in his range, is where we would assign the different parts of his hand range and how it reacts to our different actions. And then there's the far right end of the spectrum, the nut part of his hand range, which is going to be the stuff that the player's not ever going to fold. So for some players, they may never fold ace king once they hit top pair. But other players, the nut part might be ace two on an ace high board. They may never fold top pair that way. So we just really want to know the nut part is going to be basically the unfoldable portions of a player's hand range. Um, so once we consider how the different parts of their hand range react and how their hand range is weighted based off of hand combination math, which is after this lesson I'll actually send you a little article I wrote up about how to do hand combinations and how it's applicable, and it's pretty easy, really basic concept that is not a lot of people know about or are able to implement. So it'll be something that will be very helpful. But we take and we figure out what their most likely set of hand ranges are, and then we figure out how they react to it. So in this little example I have written up here, let's say we have the Stone Cold Nuts versus an aggressive 21-19 player. He's the run-of-the-mill taggy, our training site tag player that we run into a lot at the low stakes. Um, we flopped whether it be full house, quads, something that is pretty much unbeatable. So let's say we have like pocket nines on a 9-9-7 board. Um, we've raised. He's called us in position, and so we go ahead and c-bet this board. Um, when we start thinking about this player's hand range, and our bluffs are going to be cheaper, and our value hands um, are going to be, excuse me, our value hands, like we want to get called there, so we want to bet a little bit less, or so that we can get called. Um, and let's talk about this King Six hand for a second. When this guy check calls the flop, your pre-flop open is pretty loose. Uh, King Six, yeah, if it were suited, then it's okay because this is a guy we want to play pots with. King Six suited is slightly better because, like, let's say we have King Six of spades on this board. We have top pair, which is likely to be the best hand, but we can't really go for three streets with top pair without a kicker. Um, and if we had like King Six of diamonds or King Six of spades, we have top pair and a backdoor flush draw, which is just adds huge to our equity because we can pick up, 20% of the time we're going to pick up, 20% more equity. So we get an extra like three outs to add to our hand for when we're behind. Um, so I would rather this be suited, and I think it's okay because of this guy. I want to play pots with him. King Six suited is an okay hand to play with, but let's talk about this guy's flop check calling range, right? We know his preflop range is a little bit less than any two cards. So he can have like, anything here. But what hands do you think he check calls this flop with? Yeah, you can have a king. So pretty much every better king in the deck, especially Broadway kings like King 10, King Jack, King Queen, Ace King. All right. All right. So yeah, I think that's. I mean, you can have like 7, 8, pretty much like any pair, right? He's gonna check call this flop with any pair. So if we think about his hand range and how it's going to interact with this board, betting the flop is definitely the A-OK play, although checking back here with King 6 isn't going to be terrible because then we can induce action from a lot of worse hands on the turn. Um, but when we bet the flop and we think about the hands that check call the flop, it's going to be, you know, any pair versus this guy because he's a fish. That's what fish do. They check call when they have a pair. It's going to be um, all better kings in the deck. And when we bet this turn, let's think about how his hand range reacts when he bets this turn. If he has ace 7 and the queen comes off, it's an overcard to his hand, and we bet it, he's going to fold. If he has ace 3, he's going to fold. If he has a pair of tens, there's an overcard to his hand, he's going to fold, and you're double barreling, which, you know, he's thinking, oh, this guy bet twice after raising preflop. He's putting you on ace king, so he folds. And so when we bet this turn versus these type of players with a weak top pair hand, we are getting pretty much value owned by ourselves unless we have some type of read. And this guy, you know, we only have like 13 hands on him, so we don't have any particular read that says that he's going to call 3 streets with ace 7. Yeah, we're value owning ourselves, which I guess is a kind of a stupid term for saying that we're value betting his hand for us, for him. We're betting his king 10 right here. Because when he check calls this turn, I think that we're almost always beat unless we know that he's the type of player that's going to check call the turn with a pair of sevens. And we don't really know that about this guy yet. We don't know if he's going to have pocket eights here and just be unwilling to fold it. So given that, when we bet this turn and he check calls, what's going to happen a lot is that he's going to have a better hand. But what we can do is we can actually expand his range by checking the turn and letting him either bet the river with his ace 7 hands or check call the river with ace 3. Because I mean, how often do you run into those spots where you bet the flop, you check the turn, and then the fish like auto pots the river. He's just like, oh, guy checked the turn, he can't have a hand, I bet. That happens so much that we should use that line against these players when we have a hand that's not strong enough to get 3 streets of value, but is strong enough to be kind of in like the top, 55, 60% of our hand range, meaning that it's a good but not great hand that we can have. So I yeah, so he's yeah, maybe you'll try to bluff me off a pair of eights right here. But the thing is, okay, like let's think if he has king queen right here and we bet this turn, and then he calls, and then we're like, okay, now I have to bet the river all in, and he has king queen. But if he has a better hand, we do a couple things. First off, we pot control versus his better hands, right? We don't want to make a huge mistake versus this player and double him up when there's almost no way that we have the best hand versus his range, when we're a huge dog versus his turn continuing range. Um, and if he does have a better hand, then or excuse me, I just said that. If he does have a better hand, we pot control. If he has a worse hand, we give him the opportunity to feel better about his hand. When he has ace 7 and we check this queen turn, he's going to be more willing to check call a river bet than he is going to be to check call a turn bet. Um, so that's how we have to think of it. It's like, how does this person's range interact with this board texture? And on this turn, like, what is he going to do with the different parts of his hand range, and how does my hand equity fare versus that? And if we just take those two questions, like, how does his hand going to interact with his boards? And if he has the medium or the weak part of his hand range, which we're going to say is a 7 or a 3 or a pair of eights, he's going to fold on this turn. Unless he has exactly ace 7 of spades, that's the only way he can really continue. Or maybe 7, 8 of spades. We don't have to exactly give him the nut flush draw because he's not like